What if everything you think you see is actually the smallest fraction of what exists right in front of you? What if your eyes, those organs you trust completely to navigate reality, are actually filtering out more than they let in? Most people will never consider this possibility. They wake up, open their eyes, and assume they are seeing the world as it is. But here is something that will unsettle that assumption forever. Your physical eyes detect less than 1% of the electromagnetic spectrum. Less than 1%. That means 99% of reality is happening right now, in this room, around your body, through your body, and you cannot see any of it. This is not mysticism. This is physics. And yet we walk around convinced that what we perceive is all there is. We build our entire lives on this tiny sliver of information and call it truth. But there is something else. Something ancient cultures knew. Something modern science is only beginning to rediscover. There is another way of seeing, a gateway that exists cells in the center of your skull. Dormant in most people, calcified and forgotten, but still there, still waiting. Less than 1% of humanity has learned to activate it. And those who do report something that sounds impossible until you experience it yourself. Reality shifts, not metaphorically, not symbolically. The actual fabric of what you perceive changes permanently. Colors become more vivid. Patterns emerge in chaos. Information arrives before events occur. The boundary between inner and outer begins to dissolve. This is not fantasy. This is the activation of biological hardware that you already possess, but were never taught to use. Let that land for a moment. You have an organ in your brain right now that ancient Egyptians mapped with perfect anatomical precision 4,000 years ago. An organ that René Descartes, the father of modern rational philosophy, identified as the seat of the soul. An organ that produces the same compounds found in the most powerful consciousness-expanding substances known to science. And for most people, it sits there calcified, coated in fluoride deposits, essentially turned to stone. A radio with a cemented antenna, a window painted shut. But it does not have to stay that way. What you are about to discover is not speculation. It is the convergence of neuroscience, quantum physics, ancient wisdom traditions, and direct experiential reports from thousands of practitioners. This is the map to activating what has always been yours. The third eye. The inner gateway. The quantum observer that collapses infinite possibility into experienced reality. Once you understand what this organ actually is, what it actually does, and how to bring it back online, you will never see the world the same way again. Not because you will believe something different, but because you will perceive something different. And perception, as you are about to learn, is everything. So let us begin with what is actually sitting in the center of your head. Buried beneath layers of cortex, protected by the geometry of your skull, there is a structure about the size of a grain of rice. Mainstream medicine will tell you that this is the pineal gland, and its function is simple. It regulates your sleep cycle by producing melatonin. That is the official story. That is what appears in textbooks. And it is not wrong. It is just catastrophically incomplete. If you open a comparative anatomy textbook, something strange emerges. The pineal gland contains photoreceptor cells, the same type of cells found in your retina, the same cells that allow your eyes to detect light. But wait, this gland is buried deep in the center of your brain, surrounded by bone and tissue, in complete darkness. Why would it need cells designed to detect light? The answer takes us back millions of years in evolutionary history. In ancient reptiles and amphibians, this structure was not buried at all. It sat on top of the skull with a direct opening to the sky. It was literally a third eye, complete with lens, chins, and retina staring upward into the light. Some species still have it. The tuatara, a reptile from New Zealand, has a visible third eye on top of its head with a functional lens. This is not metaphor. This is biology. In humans, this eye migrated inward during evolution. It moved to the center of the brain. But here is what no one tells you. It did not lose its function of seeing. It changed what it sees. While your outer eyes capture photons in the visible spectrum and create that familiar three-dimensional image you call reality, the pineal operates as something far more sophisticated. It is a transducer. It takes electromagnetic signals that your regular eyes cannot detect and converts them into chemical and electrical experiences. It translates the invisible into the felt. Think about what that means. You have biological hardware designed to perceive beyond the visible spectrum. Hardware that evolution preserved even as it moved deeper into the brain. Hardware that ancient cultures across the globe independently identified as the seat of higher perception. And in most people, it is essentially offline. Here is where the story becomes uncomfortable. The pineal gland is one of the few areas of the brain not protected by the blood-brain barrier. This barrier normally filters what substances can reach your neural tissue. But the pineal is exposed. It drinks whatever enters your bloodstream. This makes it extraordinarily sensitive. It also makes it extraordinarily vulnerable. Fluoride, the compound added to most municipal water supplies and conventional toothpaste, has a peculiar chemical property. It has a magnetic affinity for calcium phosphate tissues. And the pineal gland is one of the most calcium-dense structures in your entire body. When fluoride enters your system, it travels straight to the pineal and begins to form deposits. Over years, these deposits accumulate. They create a shell around the gland. In medical imaging, this appears as calcification. In some adults, the pineal is so calcified it shows up on X-rays as a bright white spot, essentially turned to calcium stone. What does this mean functionally? Imagine you have a sophisticated radio receiver capable of tuning into frequencies beyond normal perception. Now imagine someone poured concrete over the antenna. The radio still exists. The circuitry is still intact, but the signal cannot get through. This is the state of most human pineal glands. Not destroyed, just silenced. But there is another dimension to this that most discussions miss entirely. The pineal gland is piezoelectric. This is pure physics, not mysticism. Inside your pineal are tiny calcite crystals. Calcite is a mineral with a unique property. When mechanical pressure is applied to it, it generates an electrical charge. This is the same principle used in certain microphones and sensors. Pressure creates electricity. Now consider what happens during specific breathing practices or deep meditation. Changes in intracranial pressure, subtle compressions and releases in the fluid surrounding the brain. These pressure changes interact with the calcite crystals in your pineal. And when they do, those crystals generate electrical signals. This is measurable. This is documented. This is happening in your skull right now, though at such low levels you do not notice it. When practitioners describe activating the third eye, they are not speaking purely in metaphor. They are describing a process where specific practices increase the piezoelectric activity of the pineal gland. The crystals fire. The gland becomes electrically active, and when this happens, something else begins. The pineal does not only produce melatonin. Under certain conditions, it synthesizes far more powerful compounds. We are talking about endogenous versions of substances that radically alter the perception of time and space. Your brain has the equipment to produce its own consciousness-expanding chemistry. But the door to that production is normally locked. Calcification blocks it. Stress suppresses it. Disconnection from natural rhythms prevents it. Dr. Rick Strassman was not joking when he called what the pineal produces the spirit molecule. His research at the University of New Mexico in the 1990s was groundbreaking. He received federal permission to administer DMT, dimethyltryptamine, to human volunteers and study the results. What he discovered challenged everything mainstream neuroscience assumed about consciousness. DMT is present in almost every living thing: plants, animals, the human body. It is one of the most common molecules in nature, and yet it produces experiences that defy ordinary explanation. Strassman's volunteers did not report vague, dreamlike states. They described with remarkable consistency encounters with non-human intelligences, entry into what they perceived as parallel dimensions. The overwhelming sense that what they were experiencing was more real than ordinary waking consciousness. Not less real. More real. Here is the question that haunts materialist neuroscience. If DMT is just a random molecule producing meaningless hallucinations, why does the brain expend precious energy producing it in the pineal gland, the command center of perception? Why would evolution preserve this capacity if it served no function? Strassman's suggestion is radical but logical. DMT may be the chemical language consciousness uses to communicate with the physical body. When the third eye activates, whether through meditation, breathwork, or extreme states, DMT floods the visual cortex through the pineal pathway. The veil of ordinary three-dimensional perception tears, and something else becomes visible. This is not about taking substances. This is about understanding that your biology already contains the keys to expanded perception. The question is whether those keys are accessible or buried under years of calcification, stress, and disconnection. Pause with that for a moment. Let it settle into your body rather than just your mind. If this is opening something in you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you continue receiving this knowledge as your awareness expands. You are walking around with hardware capable of perceiving dimensions of reality that most people will never glimpse, not because they lack the equipment, but because that equipment has been systematically degraded by modern living. Artificial light that disrupts circadian rhythms, processed food that inflames the body, water loaded with compounds that calcify the very organ designed for higher perception. Constant digital stimulation that keeps the brain locked in stress states incompatible with pineal activation. This is not conspiracy. This is simply the consequence of a civilization that has forgotten what it means to be fully human. We have traded direct perception for mediated information. We have traded the eye of Horus for the eye of the algorithm. The eye of Horus. Let us pause there because this is where ancient knowledge becomes almost unsettling in its precision. If you take a cross-section of the human brain, a sagittal cut right down the middle, and compare it to the Egyptian symbol of the eye of Horus, something impossible emerges. They match, not approximately, not symbolically, anatomically. The pupil of the eye corresponds to the thalamus. The eyebrow maps to the corpus callosum. The curve below traces the brainstem. and the precise point where the Egyptians placed the tear mark, the focus point of the entire symbol, that is exactly where the pineal gland sits. This cannot be coincidence. The geometry is too exact. The Egyptians did not have MRI machines. They did not have the anatomical knowledge we assume is required to map the brain with such precision. And yet there it is, carved in stone 4,000 years ago. A diagram of the inner eye that modern science is only now rediscovering. The Egyptians called it the all-seeing eye. But understand what they meant by that. This was not about a god in the sky watching humanity. This was about the capacity within each human to see Ma'at, the cosmic order beneath the chaos of appearances. To them, someone who had not activated this inner vision was technically dead while living, walking through existence like a sleepwalker, reacting to surfaces, never perceiving depths. What makes this even more remarkable is how this symbol appears across cultures that theoretically had no contact with each other. The pine cone, the vegetable symbol of the pineal gland, appears on the Pope's staff in Vatican City. It sits atop Buddha statues in ancient temples. It emerges in the ruins of Babylon and the carvings of Mesopotamia. Graham Hancock and other researchers have documented this extensively. There was a science of consciousness shared among civilizations separated by oceans and millennia. They were not obsessed with a small gland in the brain for aesthetic reasons. They knew it was the access point. In Egyptian tradition, the Eye of Horus was associated with healing and protection. Why? Because when you master the third eye, you stop being deceived by appearances. You begin to perceive the energetic signature of things before they manifest in physical form. You walk into a room and know, before a single word is spoken, who is trustworthy and who is not. This is not magic. This is the restoration of perceptual capacity that should be our birthright. The ancients understood that this eye needed to be fed and maintained. They used specific sounds, certain oils, particular practices to keep the perception clear. They knew that if this eye closed, humanity would become enslaved to base emotions and fear. Looking at their 4,000-year-old carvings and comparing them to modern brain scans, it becomes clear. We have not progressed. We have regressed. We traded direct knowledge of consciousness for technology that keeps us distracted from consciousness itself. René Descartes understood something similar, though he approached it from pure logic rather than mystical tradition. This was not some New Age guru. This was the mathematician who invented the Cartesian coordinate system, the foundation of modern geometry. And he was obsessed with a question most philosophers avoided. Where exactly does the non-physical soul interface with the physical body? His reasoning was elegant. All our sensory organs are paired. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 hands. The brain itself is divided into 2 hemispheres. Yet consciousness is singular. You do not have 2 separate experiences of reality. You have one unified field of awareness. Something must be unifying those dual inputs into single experience. And Descartes noticed that the pineal gland is the only structure in the brain that is not divided. It sits alone in the center, singular and unified. To a mathematician, this was proof. The pineal must be the convergence point where the unified soul meets the divided brain. He called it the seat of the soul, and spent years dissecting animal brains trying to understand its mechanics. He described how nerve impulses traveled from the eyes to the pineal, causing it to oscillate, and how the soul read those oscillations as images. Modern science dismisses Descartes because we now know the pineal produces melatonin, rather than what he called animal spirits. But this misses his deeper point entirely. He was not wrong about the function. He was just limited by the vocabulary of his time. What he called animal spirits, we now call neurotransmitters. What he described as oscillation, we now understand as electromagnetic activity. The core insight remains valid. If consciousness is unified and the brain is divided, there must be an interface point. And the pineal, singular and central, is the most logical candidate. Descartes was being rational to the ultimate consequence. And the ultimate consequence of pure rationality is the recognition that something in you perceives without using physical eyes. Something in you knows without processing information through ordinary neural pathways. The mystics called it the third eye. The philosopher called it the seat of the soul. Modern researchers call it the quantum observer. They are all pointing at the same thing. This brings us to perhaps the most profound implication of third eye activation: the relationship between observation and reality itself. In quantum physics, there is a phenomenon so strange that even the scientists who discovered it struggled to accept it: the observer effect. At the quantum level, particles do not exist in definite states until they are observed. Before observation, they exist as probability waves, clouds of potential spread across multiple possible positions and states simultaneously. The act of observation collapses this wave of possibility into a single definite reality. Read that again. The act of looking determines what becomes real. This is not philosophy. This is experimental physics, verified countless times in laboratories around the world. The double-slit experiment demonstrates it clearly. When particles are not observed, they behave like waves, passing through both slits simultaneously and creating interference patterns. When they are observed, they behave like particles, passing through one slit or the other. The presence of an observer changes the fundamental nature of reality at the quantum level. Now consider what this means for the third eye. If ordinary observation with physical eyes can collapse quantum probability into material reality, what happens when you observe with an organ designed to perceive beyond the physical spectrum? What happens when the observer becomes aware of dimensions of possibility that most people never glimpse? Dr. Joe Dispenza has spent decades researching exactly this question. He does not treat the third eye as a mystical concept, but as an electromagnetic antenna. His brain mapping studies show something remarkable. When practitioners enter deep meditative states and activate the pineal gland, their brain waves shift into gamma frequencies. These are the fastest brain waves, associated with heightened perception, enhanced cognition, and what practitioners describe as seeing the quantum field. In this state, people report perceiving energy patterns around objects and people. They describe seeing possible futures before they manifest. They experience information arriving through channels that bypass ordinary sensory input. And here is what makes Dispenza's work so significant. He measures this. He documents it. He shows the brain scans before and after. This is not subjective report alone. This is observable neurological change. If this understanding of the observer effect and how your perception shapes reality is resonating deeply, you will find the complete framework for mastering this in my book, Beyond the Frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery. What we have explored today only touches the surface of how to move from unconscious to conscious transmission and truly become the broadcast rather than merely receiving it. It is linked in the pinned comment below. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever experienced a moment where you knew something before it happened? where information arrived that you could not explain through ordinary means. Share that experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to trust their own inner knowing. The key, according to Dispenza, is moving the brain out of its default stress state. Most people spend their waking hours in beta waves, the frequency of alertness, anxiety, and survival thinking. In this state, the third eye is offline. It cannot function. The electromagnetic noise of stress overwhelms any subtle signal the pineal might receive. It is like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane. When you enter coherent meditative states, when the heart and brain synchronize their rhythms, something shifts. The piezoelectric crystals in the pineal become active. The gland begins to function not just as a melatonin factory, but as a transducer of higher frequency information. You become capable of perceiving what was always there but hidden by the noise of your own stress response. This is where intention enters the equation. The third eye does not just passively receive, it projects. When you hold a clear image in your inner vision, when you see a possibility with the vividness of present reality, you are using the pineal as a transmission device. You are collapsing quantum probability through focused observation. You are selecting from infinite potential the specific reality you will experience. This is not magical thinking. This is the logical extension of quantum physics applied to human consciousness. If observation collapses probability waves, and if the third eye is an organ of observation that operates beyond ordinary perception, then mastering the third eye gives you direct influence over what becomes real. Let that sink in. The ancients were not speaking in metaphor when they said the third eye is the command center. Ajna, the Sanskrit name for this chakra, literally means command or authority. It is not the eye that passively receives images. It is the eye that directs energy, that selects reality, that determines which possibility among infinite possibilities will crystallize into experience. But here is what most people miss. You cannot command what you cannot see, and you cannot see beyond the physical until the organ of higher perception is functional. This is why activation of the third eye is not just interesting spiritual development. It is the prerequisite for conscious reality creation. Without it, you are choosing from a menu you cannot read. You are navigating a landscape you cannot perceive. You are reacting to effects while remaining blind to causes. So how does one actually begin this activation? Not as theory, not as concept, as lived practice. The first step is understanding that you are working with biology, not belief. The pineal gland is a physical organ with physical requirements. It needs to be decalcified. It needs proper chemical precursors. It needs the right electromagnetic environment to function. Decalcification is a process, not an event. It requires consistent attention to what enters your body. Filtered water that removes fluoride and other calcifying compounds. Organic food that does not burden the system with toxins. Reduction of artificial light exposure, especially in the hours before sleep. These are not spiritual practices in the traditional sense. They are biological maintenance of the hardware required for spiritual perception. But physical cleansing alone is not enough. The pineal must be activated, not just cleared. This is where specific practices become essential. Breathwork is perhaps the most direct method. When you change your breathing pattern, you change the pressure dynamics in your skull. Certain breathing techniques create rhythmic pressure waves that stimulate the piezoelectric crystals in the pineal. The gland begins to generate electrical charge. With sustained practice, this charge builds. The gland becomes increasingly active. One powerful approach involves breathing in a way that draws energy up the spine. You breathe deeply into the lower belly, then use muscular contractions to squeeze that energy upward through the spinal column toward the brain. As the energy reaches the area of the pineal, you hold the breath and focus attention on the point between and slightly above your eyebrows. The combination of pressure, breath retention, and focused attention creates conditions for pineal activation. But understand, this is not a one-time technique. This is a practice, a daily returning. The pineal that has been dormant for years does not fully activate in a single session. It requires consistent stimulation over time. Like a muscle that has atrophied, it must be gradually rebuilt. Sound is another powerful activation tool. The pineal gland responds to specific frequencies. Certain tones create resonance in the crystalline structure of the gland, stimulating its activity. This is why chanting has been used across cultures for millennia. It is not merely symbolic, it is vibrational technology. The sound Om, properly intoned, creates a resonance in the skull that directly affects the pineal region. Modern researchers have identified specific frequencies that appear to enhance pineal function. Binaural beats in the gamma range, when listened to with headphones, can help entrain the brain into states conducive to third eye activation. But the most powerful sound activation comes from your own voice, your own breath, your own vibrational production. External sounds can support. Internal sounds transform. Darkness practice is perhaps the most ancient and most powerful method. The pineal gland is designed to respond to light and darkness. In complete darkness, freed from the constant stimulation of light, the gland begins to shift its chemical production. Extended periods in darkness, what some traditions call dark retreat, can trigger profound activation of the third eye. This makes biological sense. The pineal evolved as a light-detecting organ. When light is completely absent, it enters a different mode of operation. Melatonin production increases dramatically at first. But with extended darkness, something else begins. The gland starts producing the more powerful compounds associated with visionary states. This is why mystics throughout history have retreated to caves. They were not hiding from the world. They were creating the conditions for inner vision to awaken. You do not need to spend weeks in a cave to benefit from darkness practice. Even sleeping in complete darkness, covering all light sources, using blackout curtains, removing electronic devices with LED indicators, this alone begins to support pineal function. The gland that has been overstimulated by constant artificial light begins to remember its deeper purpose. Meditation focused on the third eye region amplifies all these practices. When you direct attention to the point between your eyebrows, you are sending blood flow and electromagnetic energy to that area. The brain prioritizes what you focus on. Consistent focus on the third eye region literally changes the neurological activity in that area. But there is a subtlety here that most instructions miss. The third eye is not located between your eyebrows. That is the trigger point. The actual gland is in the center of your head, roughly at the level of your eyebrows, but several inches back. When you focus on the point between your eyebrows, you are activating the front door. But the real work happens deeper. Advanced practitioners learn to shift their attention from the surface point to the deep center. You begin at the eyebrow point, then gradually draw your focus backward and inward, as if you were looking at something in the very center of your skull. This deeper focus creates more powerful activation. It stimulates the gland directly rather than just the surface energy point. Visualization practice trains the third eye to see. Most people have atrophied inner vision. When they close their eyes, they see darkness or vague shapes at best. The visual capacity of the third eye must be rebuilt through practice. Start by visualizing simple shapes, a sphere of light, a specific color. Hold the image with as much clarity as you can. Over time, the images become more vivid, more stable, more detailed. You are training the organ of inner sight to function. This is not imagination in the dismissive sense that word is often used. This is activation of the visual cortex through internal rather than external stimulation. Brain scans show that vivid visualization activates the same regions as actual seeing. You are teaching your brain to see without physical eyes. And as this capacity develops, something remarkable begins to happen. The boundary between inner vision and outer perception begins to blur. You start to notice things you did not notice before. Patterns in events, energy around people, a sense of what is about to happen before it happens. Information arrives that you cannot trace to any ordinary source. You know things you have no logical reason to know. This is not supernatural. This is the natural function of an organ that has been suppressed. When the third eye comes online, you are simply perceiving more of what is actually there. The reality has not changed. Your capacity to perceive it has expanded. But here is something important. Third eye activation is not always comfortable. As the gland becomes active, you may experience pressure or tingling in the forehead region. You may have unusually vivid dreams. You may find that you become more sensitive to the energy of places and people, and this sensitivity can be overwhelming at first. Some people report seeing things they would rather not see. The third eye does not filter for pleasantness. It shows what is. And what is includes dimensions of reality that can be disturbing to a consciousness accustomed to the comfortable limitations of ordinary perception. This is why the ancient traditions always embedded third eye practices within larger frameworks of ethical development and emotional purification. Opening the eye of higher perception while still caught in lower emotional patterns can be destabilizing. You see more, but you do not yet have the wisdom to integrate what you see. The solution is not to avoid activation, but to approach it with respect, to combine the opening of perception with the cultivation of equanimity, to develop the capacity to witness whatever arises without being overwhelmed by it. The third eye shows reality as it is. Your task is to become someone who can handle that vision. What old patterns of perception are you ready to release as you step into this expanded way of seeing? Drop your answer in the comments. Sometimes naming what you are letting go creates the space for what is arriving. There is another dimension to this that rarely gets discussed. The third eye does not just receive, it transmits. When your pineal gland is active, you become visible on frequencies that most people cannot perceive. Other beings, other intelligences, other humans with active third eyes, they can sense you. This is why activated individuals often report feeling called to each other. They recognize something in another person that goes beyond physical appearance or social presentation. They are seeing each other on a frequency that the majority cannot access. A kind of recognition happens, a silent acknowledgement. You are one of the ones who sees. This creates community in a different way than ordinary social connection. It is not based on shared beliefs or common interests in the usual sense. It is based on shared perception, on operating at a frequency that allows communication beyond words, on knowing that you are both glimpsing the same deeper reality beneath the surface of things. As more people activate this capacity, something collective begins to shift. The quantum field responds to observation. When more observers are perceiving at higher frequencies, the field itself changes. Possibilities that were previously too subtle to collapse into reality become available. Timelines that required a critical mass of coherent observation to manifest become accessible. This is not just personal development. This is participation in the evolution of human consciousness itself. Every individual who brings their third eye online adds to a growing field of coherent perception. Every person who learns to see beyond the veil contributes to a collective awakening that is already underway. You are not alone in this. You are part of something larger, something that has been building for generations, something that the ancient traditions predicted and prepared for. The opening of the inner eye on a collective scale. The restoration of humanity's birthright of full-spectrum perception. But it begins with you, with your practice, with your daily returning to the work of activation. No one can do this for you. No one can open your third eye from the outside. The hardware is yours. The potential is yours. The choice to activate is yours. And once you do, once that eye truly opens, reality shifts forever. Not because the world changes, but because you finally see what was always there. You see the energy that flows through all things. You see the connections that link events across time. You see the choices that create consequences long before those consequences manifest. You see yourself, perhaps for the first time, as you actually are. Not the story you tell about yourself, not the image you present to others, the actual energetic signature of your being. And in that seeing, transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. You cannot unsee through what the third eye reveals. You cannot go back to the comfortable blindness of ordinary perception. You are changed, permanently, irreversibly, expanded into a version of yourself that was always potential but is now actual. Consider returning to this video each morning before you begin your day. Let these words reset your perception and remind you of what you are activating. And if someone comes to mind as you listen, someone who is ready for this knowledge, share this with them. When you pass on these principles, you create a ripple in the quantum field that amplifies your own activation while opening doorways for another consciousness to awaken. This is what it means to see what others cannot. Not special powers granted from outside, not magical abilities that violate natural law, simply the restoration of perceptual capacity that should have been yours all along. The activation of hardware that evolution preserved for exactly this purpose. The opening of the quantum gateway that connects your individual consciousness to the infinite field of possibility. The ancient Egyptians knew, Descartes suspected, Strassmann documented, Dispenza measures, and now you understand. The question is no longer whether this is real. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is whether you will do the work, whether you will commit to the daily practice of activation, whether you will clean your body, quiet your mind, and create the conditions for your inner eye to open. The world is full of people who know about the third eye, who find the concept interesting, who talk about it at parties and share articles about it on social media. But knowing about something and experiencing it are entirely different things. The map is not the territory. The menu is not the meal. You are being invited to stop reading about perception and start perceiving, to stop thinking about consciousness and start experiencing expanded consciousness directly, to stop believing in the third eye and start seeing through it. This is not comfortable. Growth never is. The caterpillar does not enjoy becoming a butterfly. The seed does not enjoy breaking open in the dark soil. But what emerges from that discomfort is worth everything it costs. You have a choice right now. You can close this and return to ordinary perception. You can file this information away as interesting but not immediately relevant. You can continue living with the third eye dormant, seeing only what physical eyes reveal, navigating reality based on less than 1% of available information. Or you can begin. Tonight, when you sleep, make the room completely dark. Remove every source of light. Let your pineal gland experience true darkness, perhaps for the first time in years. Tomorrow, when you wake, before you reach for your phone, before you check your messages, sit in stillness. Breathe deeply. Draw your attention to the point between your eyebrows. Hold it there for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. Feel what happens. The next day, do it again, and the day after that, and the day after that. Within weeks, you will notice something shifting, a pressure in the forehead, a tingling sensation. Dreams becoming more vivid, intuitions becoming more accurate. The first subtle signs that something is waking up. Follow those signs. They are your guidance. They are the third eye beginning to communicate with your ordinary consciousness. They are the door starting to open. And when it opens fully, when you finally see what has always been there, you will understand why those who have walked this path speak of it with such reverence. You will understand why ancient cultures built entire civilizations around the preservation of this knowledge. You will understand why the forces of distraction and calcification work so hard to keep this eye closed. Because a humanity that sees is a humanity that cannot be controlled. A humanity that perceives beyond the physical is a humanity that cannot be manipulated through physical means alone. A humanity with activated third eyes is a humanity stepping into its true power. This is your birthright. This is your potential. This is what you came here to remember. The gateway is in the center of your skull. It has been waiting your entire life, and now you know how to open it. The only question remaining is whether you will. Close your eyes for a moment. Right now, bring your attention to that point between your eyebrows. Feel the space there. Feel the potential. Feel the ancient knowing that lives in your cells, in your DNA, in the very structure of your being. You are more than you have been told. You can see more than you have been shown. Reality is vaster than you have been permitted to believe, and it is all available to you right now, in this moment. Through the gateway that has been waiting in the center of your head since the day you were born. Open it. See what others cannot. And let reality shift forever. Now that you understand how observation shapes reality through the third eye, you are ready to learn the exact mechanics of how to use this perception to manifest what you desire. Watch how to manifest easily with quantum physics to discover the precise methods for collapsing possibility into your chosen experience.